we're going to have is a panel discussion on risk, reputation, and responsibility, ESG management with a real impact. To discuss this, I would like to welcome on stage Bhavin Mehta, Vice President Legal Compliance, EEMEA at MasterCard UAE. Can we please have a round of applause? Next, I would like to call Matthew Noble, Chief Compliance Officer, MEA at GE Power. Ahmed Kandil, Ethnic and Compliance and ERM Director at Bosch& Lomb. Minkyu Kim, Regional General Counsel at LG Electronics, and Karthik Ventukar, Director at EY. Venkata, my bad. So we are all set for the panel discussion, guys.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in discussion about how legal function can support sustainable ESG program. It is my honor to introduce our esteemed panelists. This panelist will bring expertise and knowledge and experience to this panel discussion. Well, let me start with Matthew. He is the Chief Compliance Officer of GE Gas Power. He has been with GE for more than 15 years and is a trusted advisor and member of the leadership team. He helps to drive business results through the implementation of a best-in-class ethic and compliance and risk management program. And Bhavin, he has been with MasterCard for 7 years and currently serves as Vice President, Legal Compliance, leading overall ethics and compliance program for Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa business based out of Dubai. He is a solution-focused compliance risk and governance professional and with over 20 years of management experience in the field of legal compliance, risk management, internal audits, and controls. So he serves also as an advisory board member for the Lex Talk World Global Conferences. And next to him, Ahmed. He started his career with healthcare industry in 2004. During his career, he had the chance to support the different regions in healthcare compliance, risk management, finance, commercial, and project management. Currently, he is working for Bosch & Lomb as a Global Ethics Compliance Director, leading global risk management and ABAC program implementation. Prior to joining Bosch & Lomb, he worked also for GlaxoSmithKline and Johnson & Johnson. And lastly, Karthik. He's a director in Ernst & Young, Middle East. He carries more than 12 years of consulting experience in digital solutions, transformation strategy, tech-led forensics, and risk frameworks. As an innovator at heart, he has conceptualized and built various anti-fraud technology platforms and established successful innovation and turnaround practices in his career. He currently focuses on exploring opportunities and risks in advanced new age and emerging technology, especially in GCC region. Right, welcome Matthew, Bhavin, Ahmed, and Karthik to this panelist. By the way, I'm Minkyu Kim, a Regional General Counsel for LG Electronics. And I'm so happy to participate in this panel discussion. And I'm looking forward to engaging and productive discussion today. Thank you. All right, then let's start. Maybe Matthew, you could start. The first question would be, how do you define ESG management and why it has become increasingly important for businesses in recent years?
Great. Thank you, Minkyu. Good day, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you, and thank you to Lex Talk World for hosting us. I would briefly mention that all the comments are my own perspective. I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer. Incidentally, if you're interested, you can check out GE sustainability reports at ge.com/sustainability. So please do check that out. In terms of my personal views, we know that ESG and sustainability is the hot topic of the day. It's in all of our news feeds. We hear about it on a global basis. We hear about it coming from the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. We hear about it from regulation coming from the US and from other jurisdictions as well. It's going to be more and more critical for corporates to be able to produce this information, report it accurately, have it attested by auditors, so that then it's decision useful for investors, for different stakeholders around the world, in order to make decisions about where they're going to put their capital, etc. How do you define ESG, environmental, social, and governance? It means different things to different industries. I always give the example, you can imagine a beverage manufacturer. Their primary ingredient is water. You compare that to an IT firm where the primary issue around ESG may be privacy, right? So very different sectors, very different concerns in terms of ESG metrics. I think it's going to be important for compliance professionals, for the legal team to be very well informed about changes in regulation, what matters to your industry and your clients, how can you best advise them to prepare a strategy, to prepare reporting so that it's auditable, so that then you can compare apples to apples. So a lot can be said here, and I look forward to the discussion with the rest of the panel. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, let's move to Bhavin. What are the emerging trends in ESG management, and how can companies stay ahead of the curve to maintain a competitive edge in this area?
Thanks, Minkyu, and good morning, everyone. Good to see you all, albeit without mask this year. So it's great to see the smiling faces. As regards, Minkyu, your question on the trends, right? I believe from a ESG adoption perspective, we see it's quite positive trend. I mean, simply that we are speaking about ESG in this forum signifies how it is getting front and center for business world, for professional community, because I think there is too much of buzz, as Matt also mentioned about the importance with regulators too. So it's going to stay here with us. It's getting more and more important. But at the same time, I see from a trend perspective, the adoption trends, as I said, are positive. But when you look at ESG management, some of the key trending, I would say, areas which I see from early adoption now, obviously, most of us are here from markets where there was a company law requiring us for CSR reporting in the past. Now, so I think one of the significant changes or trends, I would say, has happened that it's no more a tick box exercise. Companies in the past were simply taking it as a
मेरा
reporting
दूसरा वाला फोन
exercise.
था बाबू देख व्हाट्सएप अच्छा ये सेशन आ गया
Was there a question? Oh, I think it's the next one. Sorry, yeah, I'll continue. So again, I think from a, I would say ESG overall trend perspective, it's no more a tick box exercise. Companies are seeing the value which implementing ESG is bringing to them, and they are looking to integrate this with the overall corporate objectives. And I think that's kind of value which ESG brings into companies when they align their corporate objectives and strategy to ESG goals as well. Now, I think one of the other areas when we're seeing trending in terms of ESG management is also at the decision-making level. A lot of companies are adopting and implementing ESG in their decision-making process. One of the companies, I would say, again, on a no-name basis, and again, in spirit of what Matt mentioned about the caveats, this is the personal opinion, not of my employer. But then again, I see that one of the companies, they were challenged with a decision on identifying an event they could sponsor. Now, one of the objectives they had was on ESG principle. And so deciding on an opportunity which aligns with this particular objective and deciding on what to go for, kind of made sure that they do not sponsor a sporting activity wherein there was no ESG. So any guesses which probably could be the activity? So they were planning to do a Formula One sponsorship, but they thought this is kind of a non-renewable energy source, and just utilizing it for entertainment doesn't sit well with their overall objective on ESG. So that's how now companies increasingly, I see that they are moving towards adopting a decision making, adopting ESG as a goals and aligning that with their corporate goals and strategy. Other thing, when we look at the ESG overall principle, the two key trending areas within ESG are kind of climate change, which forms part of E. And then also we see there is a significant trend on the social piece from social impact, diversity, inclusion. Now I see some people here who might be following IPL. Does anyone follow IPL? Does anyone know how they are aligning their objectives with ESG? Anyone? I don't know if somebody follows IPL. Okay, so let me answer that in the interest, right? So I would say for every dot ball which is not scored, they're contributing and they're planting one tree, which is a very strong example of how you can elevate your brand and you can showcase that you are investing in ESG. That comes from a climate perspective. When your focus is on reducing greenhouse emissions, and that could be done in two ways, right? Either you reduce the emissions or you kind of plant trees and make sure that you're using or other renewable sources of energy and you're reducing non-renewables. From a social impact perspective, I see companies these days having a strong focus on diversity, inclusion, human rights. They are making sure that leadership positions have diversity, their board membership also has diversity. So that's, I think, emerging trend as well, which we're seeing with ESG management. Another big focus area I've seen is in the past, corporates used to focus on ESG in isolation. They will discuss this within the management team, and then they will implement those principles. However, recently we see that doing that is great. I mean, from a company perspective, because you would have much better control. But when you're not taking diverse feedback, when you're not involving your investors, when you're not involving your regulators, your customers, business partners, I think it gets diluted to an extent. And so we're seeing a trend wherein companies now are kind of reaching out to their external partners as well, getting the feedback, making their ESG related actions more transparent. And then also when we look at some of the investment decisions these days, another trend is companies who adopt ESG gets better investment. So I think it's all come to benefit, again, in kind of summary, how ESG is trending is on the lines because it's becoming more and more important, not only to the corporate, but to the society at large. I think your second part of the question was about how we can get ahead, right? Simple sense, I would say to get ahead of the game, you need to do the basics right, firstly. And then also once you have the basics right, you don't need to become complacent. You need to keep on investing. You need to keep on innovating, and you need to making sure that you are having monitoring of your principles as well. Simple steps like having the SMART goals on ESG, making it more kind of objective for the organization, having your policies around ESG communicated to the teams, investing in systems, technology, tools for tracking and monitoring and reporting. And last, as I said, inventing or innovating something which is unique to your organization will help you to stay ahead of curve.
If I can chime in, just as you were speaking, something came to my mind. This is not an EU or US story, as I mentioned before. This is a global thing. And here in the Middle East, we take a look at Dubai. In 2020, the Securities and Commodities Authority, which governs all of the investments in UAE, required all UAE listed companies, so on the Abu Dhabi or Dubai exchanges, to publish sustainability reports. So it's already required here in this market. Companies who are listed must publish these reports. And then there was a very interesting study published by PwC just last week. You can find it online. They reported that 64% of companies across the region, small and medium enterprises, as well as the larger names that we all know, have a very strategic sustainability plan down to the letter. You know, it's something that guides their strategy overall. And 27% of those companies have a CSO, a Chief Sustainability Officer. So here in the region, it's absolutely critical, and they're spending a lot of time, resources, and energy in this area. So it's a global story, really.
Thank you so much. And then the comments added by Ahmed. What about Ahmed? What are the key challenges companies face when implementing effective ESR management strategy, and how can they overcome these key challenges?
Yeah, well, so the first thing that may come up to my mind is the lack of integration. Uh, as the ASG is not a standalone function. So I remember the first thing I did, so when I was trying to study and assess the ESG risk management, it was a big challenge. Who shall we interview? How we collect the information? For example, if I'm assessing finance or financial controls, supply chain continuity, and so on and so forth, I know the specific person that I shall meet with. But here, for the ESG, you interview with finance, quality, R&D, supply chain, HR, all functions. So the first thing that you may think here, how to integrate the information together, how to unify the direction and people's thoughts toward one action plan. So here is to define roles and responsibilities, maybe some communication tone at the top, teach people by example, tell them what's happening there, and so on and so forth. So this is really crucial thing if we are trying to get it there. The second one, which I was discussing with other people, and also as Matthew was trying to explain here, that it became mandatory requirement in some of the markets to submit or report some ESG information either annually or quarterly. Yes, in most markets it's not, you may not face any fines if you did not submit your data, but you're still facing some reputational risk, or it could impact your share prices and could impact your reputation in the market. So here, how to collect the information. There is no one software or business application could integrate the information in one place, as we collect information from supply chain, collect information from HR, finance, and so on and so forth. So here is the problem. Are we going to collect and integrate the information manually and face the threats in the future that we may not be able to support the information that we submitted and collected by documents? I believe and I hear that some of service providers, IT technology service providers, are working to develop some softwares. I remember that I received a couple of calls and a couple of meetings from some people trying to introduce new softwares where it could integrate all information and help in collecting information. Yeah, well, so as we speak, stakeholder management. As we said that there is integration challenge. Also, we have a stakeholders engagement challenge. As you're aware that each function in the organization has its own objectives and company objectives. So here we go. So it's all about aligning roles and responsibilities toward the same direction. Another one, which is the supply chain complexity, which is classified under the E part. After COVID-19, we all aware that we are facing a lot of supply issues. As we were thinking, so I'll explain something here very quickly. We have the single sourcing and dual sourcing. The direction before that, we need to have several suppliers to ensure continuity, so to avoid the single sourcing problem. But after COVID-19, it came to our attention that single sourcing can be market, not only suppliers. So we consider China, if all suppliers are coming out from China or India or any other countries, this means a single sourcing. So which is the problem? So now facing this challenge and trying to apply the E word, which is to protect from climate change, going green, and those elements, okay, during this pandemic and during the supply continuity issue. So this is also another challenge, but we may overcome this by adding additional background check and checking with our suppliers and working with them very hard to ensure that we're doing it in the right direction. You know, it's not an easy task, but it may take, you know, sometimes to overcome this and come up with solutions, qualifying new suppliers. And I know that some companies started to, you know, produce their materials or partner with their third parties to produce their materials. Regulatory environment challenge, as most of multinational companies, okay, we don't follow the same regulations in ESG and all regulations in general. So it challenge that somebody needs to keep an eye on regulations and update and reflect on the process and what we're doing exactly to ensure that we are in the right track in terms of the company structure. Another one, which is the change resistance. So as any change, okay, you will see a lot of people resist the change. So this is human beings, so we cannot avoid this. This happens everywhere. But people always resist change because they don't understand. So help people to understand, communicate with them very well, so people will support you. So as simple as that. I know this is not easy, but it requires a lot of communication from the top management, lead by example, maybe some reflection in the office to reflect what people have learned from the communication and training and start to do that. My last part, which is really interesting, as ESG, ESG requires a lot of investments. So to investments means cash amounts, resources, and time allocated from the senior people, which are the most expensive people in the company itself to support the program. So all of that for long-term benefits, for long-term objectives. So you're giving and investing a lot of resources for now to see the outcomes in the future. So this is also another problem, as during the the financial situation we're through, people want to see the quick wins, you know. So so why I need to invest in the climate change, where I need to invest in some quality, some other stuff. So it's really important to align the company strategies with ESG requirement if we want to overcome this challenge. Actually, we have too many things to say here, but you know, just to respect the time, you know, that's it from my side.
Thank you
Can
for
I
your
just add
insights. Yeah.
a real life challenge, right? Which obviously I faced this morning here. Now, obviously, I think we spoke about internal challenges and kind of challenges in getting this ideology implemented. Now, it's also about challenges with the ecosystem. You as an organization has taken an initiative of, let's say, implementing a climate change initiative. Simple example for us, we have stopped issuing business cards and we just do NFC cards these days. And I see a lot of challenge this morning when I had to exchange the business card. So that's again, I think it's a change. It's a slow change, which will take time to kind of get rolled out with, I think, everybody in the ecosystem. But I think we all believe in this and we will see the kind of benefit which comes out of this long term, as Ahmed said.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. So now let's start with Bobin again. How do you see the relationship between ESG management and a company's reputation? Can effective ESG management lead to improved brand value and customer loyalty? So how do you think?
So it's a great question. Look, I mean, I think there is no doubt, I think, in anybody's mind here whether implementing ESG has any linkage or benefit to company's reputation, right? I mean, obviously, we all agree and we all understand that, yes, it is. Though what is challenging is, I think what Ahmed spoke about, right, is if companies don't get it right, there could be severe negative impacts as well. And so while there is direct link between how you integrate your ESG principles into your overall business, I would say, environment, not getting it right could be, I would say, a drawback as well. Having said that, I would say that's why, I mean, we see companies taking it slow. It's a change management which requires to be done well, not always easy, but if done well, we see there's a lot of positives in company getting best out of their mindset and implementation of their strategy on ESG. Now, coming to how implementation of this with in the organization can help build customer reputation and also kind of bring you support and loyalty from your kind of consumers, your customers. I think absolutely, like with any of the good practices or best practices, I would say that we want to implement. It could be ESG, could be any other kind of, I would say, aspects as well. There is always, yes, there is inclination from everybody. There is so much affinity that people want to really see corporations do well. But again, I think they sometimes believe that this is done only to kind of greenwash, right? It's only a tick box exercise. And that's what we are seeing currently being changing. If done rightly, I would say it builds and helps companies create reputation. Why? Because people will see that you are having a right intent. You are doing things which are kind of important, not only from a business and money perspective, but also overall environment perspective. You're kind of helping communities kind of, I would say, get enhanced as well. So I think that's very important message. When people see that and take note of organizations, it creates reputation. It brings kind of affinity as well to those brand and to kind of those products. So I would say that's the first piece. Secondly, with a lot of regulators and authorities these days, they value corporations investing money and doing the right thing for the community, societies, countries, and again, I think from various, we all know, I mean, the top of the town is currently climate change, how we engage in a diverse manner and kind of be more inclusive of all the workforce. I think there's a significant focus from regulators as well. Now, if you do it well, I think you get, you become trusted partner. It kind of helps organization manage the regulatory expectations, and also when there are challenges or issues, the regulator will take a kind of, I would say, approach which might not be very strict one against you. So that's the second benefit, which helps when you have a good implementation. Then from competitor perspective, if I'm doing something great on these principles versus Ahmed, then again, I think I don't need to pick on Ahmed, but let's assume if I as an organization or an individual, I'm doing something which kind of people relate to, they will always have better affinity to me and they will probably like me and like my products. So I think it helps you to get ahead of competition as well. And so that brings to another benefit. Lastly, I would say from a risk management perspective, when you implement ESG as an overall strategy, you kind of become much more aware of what your risk areas are, and I think are better equipped in managing this risk. And so I would say overall, when you look at those factors, it certainly helps you get ahead of the game, and it also helps you to bring more brand affinity and I would say loyalty from your customers.
Just one thing as well we can think about is the labor market. So we have millennials, and just behind them we have Gen Z, right? And as we think about who wants to work for what types of companies, there's clear indication from surveys, et cetera, of these different cohorts that they want to work for corporations which have a clear pro-social, positive mission and purpose. And without that, they'll choose not to work there or to continue to work there. And if there's environmental or social issues, we've seen walkouts, we've seen all kinds of things happen across the world. So that's another dynamic, is the labor and, you know, where we're all going to choose to work. And I think this is going to shift over the coming years. So it's going to become even more important for corporations to build this into part of their strategy.
Thank you so much. Well, now let's talk about risk. I think I'll start with Kathy. So, what implementing ESG strategy, what fraud risk do organizations have to mitigate? So, and also, what role does technology play in mitigating risk with the ESG?
Okay. Thank you for asking that, and hello, everyone. So when we see organizations transforming themselves, typically, whether it is due to regulatory, concerns, best practices, or emerging trends, there's always this angle of implementing something that you don't fully understand or that you're not fully aware of. And that always leads to gaps in controls and processes, and which in turn results in risks of fraud, waste, and abuse. ESG is no different. After all, it's a strategy, implementation, and policies that percolate through the organization. And it's very important to realize the fraud risks that come with bad ESG implementations. The key fraud risk, the talk of the town or the elephant in the room as of now, is greenwashing. For those who don't know, greenwashing is simply the practice of an organization who's misrepresenting or miscalculating their environmental credentials or their ESG practices. And this greenwashing has been going on for a few years, actually, while ESG was developing. And there are several reasons to it. There's no one good reason, there's several of them. One of the things that we see is when an organization is liaising with a third party or investing in a third party, if they're not doing proper due diligence, especially on how credible and transparent the practices of the third party are, it leads to a massive fraud risk. Secondly, it's the data that the organizations are working on during their ESG implementations. If that is improper, inconsistent, inaccurate, you will again create fraud risks. The third one is the lack of independent verification of the ESG practice itself. Look, there's no one way of saying that this is exactly how your ESG practice should work. But what always helps is to get an external perspective and validation of your practices too. And the lack of that is going to create a lot of issues and obviously raise a lot of risks, especially fraudulent risks. Now, the underpinning aspect that we have noticed in the trends is that many of the organizations want to expedite their ESG program, which kind of leads to internal turmoil. So resulting in we need to do this rather than we need to do this right. And I think that's very important for organizations to consider. Another key driver for fraud risks is the data itself. As most of you know, ESG is backed up by the data that is going into the program. And if your data pipeline, starting from the collection to verification to consumption and then finally to reporting, is not secure enough, you will have issues of data manipulation, falsification, eventually leading to multiple fraud risks. And this is happening a lot over the past decade or so. And there are obviously many reasons to it. Some have already been highlighted. It is to kind of attract investors, to satisfy regulatory bodies, or to sell more products. With all of this in mind, though, one shining light right now is that as ESG evolves, so does the technology associated with it evolves. Now, as Ahmed was rightly mentioning, there's no one tech answer to ESG. There are multiple bits and pieces. You have AI, which is kind of obviating the need for human intervention when handling the data. You have blockchain, which is creating traceability and transparency through supply chain and carbon offsets. And then you have certain digital platforms that are facilitating standardization, consistency, and compatibility of ESG metrics. So combination of all these technologies is what will help anyone, mitigate the fraud risks. So having said all of that, tech is not the panacea of ESG. It has to be combined with robust governance, with ethical practices, and in the end, a valid human judgment. As Bhavin was mentioning, the tone at the top is extremely important. If you get the G of ESG right, you will be able to mitigate risks not just now, but in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, now we need to talk about the profitability of companies. So Ahmed, so how can company balance the need for profitability with their ESG responsibility, and how can they communicate the long-term benefits of ESG management to shareholders and other stakeholders?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll stick to the point that Pavian was trying to mention in the beginning of the session today, is to integrate the ESG initiatives with the company strategic decisions. So this is really important. So you cannot separate between both of them. So both shall work together if you wanted to have a successful ESG program. So the other one is, here we go, invest in the innovation and R&D. And this is again, so this is pretty much tying the e-board, which is really important. So we were talking about supply chain continuity and how to qualify new suppliers if you wanted to ensure the climate change initiatives and going green and those perspectives. Some companies decided to invest in the R&D line to do it by itself. So it's going to be easier for them and also more effective. So this is something we really encourage. Also report the ESG initiatives, achievement, and accomplishment, and communicate to everybody in the organization. So this is really important to ensure that we have the reflection as well as the training. So because training without reflection is something incomplete. So this is to complete the picture here. Another one which was in the challenge piece, which the stakeholders engagement. So if you wanted to ensure high profitability of any organization, everybody should be on the same page. So engaging with everybody in the organization. So this is really a great value. The other part, which is really interesting, I'm not very sure how to share it, but it's happening in some organization, is paying kind of compensation to executive teams for implementing ESG. So it's a tool or mechanism to incentivize your team of achieving ESG strategies and initiatives. So it may work, but it's worth to mention that some companies are doing that. So as a final thing, I may say here that ESG is a very long-term program. It has a lot of initiatives, a lot of actions. It's not one go action. It's a way of working. So we're learning every year. So we have I've seen the ESG risk in the life sciences. So we started to see some reports coming out for ESG and a lot of events like this talking about ESG. So we're expecting a lot of changes in the very near future.
Thank you. And while we are talking about the ESG and how it should be set up, can you tell us some bad examples of ESG as well, Karthik?
Quite a loaded question. Let me find some examples that won't really alienate the crowd over here. Um, One of the most public scandals over the past decade has been the Volkswagen scandal, which is the clean diesel one. And that's a prime example of using technology to enable greenwashing rather than to fight it. So as we all know, Volkswagen had touted their diesel cars to be extremely environment friendly, best in the industry, emission standards, so on and so forth. Then we found out that they had used certain software to suppress and also to manipulate the emission results themselves. That's a prime example. More recently, this is like the hot take in the ESG circles right now. We're seeing the South Pole scandal. South Pole is a Swiss carbon finance consulting firm. It's always been touted as one of the oldest companies selling carbon offsets from forest protection programs. And recently, it has been alleged by Renosta and some other carbon rating firms that the additionality that they were trying to propose is inaccurate. In a sense, the money that they were putting in and the carbon offsets that were being generated were inaccurately reported because of their prediction of the forests that they were planning to protect were not really there to protect. So these are two amazing examples where people have used technology and media to create a narrative that wasn't there. Again, recently, SEC has levied $1.5 million, I guess, on BNY Melton, if I remember right, over mutual funds that they said were ESG quality reviewed. Unfortunately, they weren't. And again, FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, levied a $3 million fine or something on Walmart for textile goods that they said were created out of bamboo, and that wasn't really the case. They used hazardous chemicals and whatnot for it. So all in all, I think that regulators are now coming around and trying to raise ESG as critical concerns in doing business. And as we've all been talking about it for the past 40 minutes or so, there's no one way of implementing the right ESG, but it always, again, starts from the top. And the way that ESG program is implemented has to evolve with the times. Yeah.
Right. Due to the time limits, maybe this would be the last question. So what kind of advice would you give, Matthew, especially for those companies are just started their ESG management journey, and in terms of setting priorities, allocating resources, and engaging with the stakeholders, what advice you could give?
Sure, great, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be part of this panel, and thank you to all the other panelists. It's my view that these are not nice to have. This is not just CSR, good corporate citizen. In my view, these are core business, going concern, profitability, brass tacks issues. How are we going to grow our business, our products and services over the long term? What do we need to do? We need to continually upskill ourselves, invest in our personal education, and spread that information throughout your organization or your client organizations. We need to be carefully monitoring the regulations, deep diving into understanding how they actually apply to each and every industry in which we are in. We can advocate as well. We can actually participate in the discussion. Many of these regulators call for, exposure drafts and recommendations from the industry. I recommend that we participate in that. So there's many different things that we can do. It's my view that this is a long-term thing. This is not a fad. This is not just the flavor of the day. I think this is something that we're all going to have to deal with for decades to come, and it's important that we do. So I would just wrap with that. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, still we have 30 seconds, but maybe we could have a few more minutes for questions from.
I think we are around probably if there are questions. Okay, one question.
No problem. Sorry. Hi, my name is Sal. I am the CEO of ESG MENA, the first and only ESG knowledge hub in the MENA region. So we're promoting ESG in the MENA region, and I can see many from the Middle East and many from India. As you know, the GCC central banks announced unified regulations for the publicly listed companies for the GCC. And there are talks of beyond publicly listed mandatory ESG reporting. You mentioned greenwashing that we've been covering in depth. You as global companies with cross-border activities, how are you aligning your ESG strategy between the GCC and India, as India is one of the world's top markets?
Thank you for the question. Maybe I'll just start and maybe you guys want to add. But I think firstly, I think you should be on the panel, having a ESG firm. So look, I think global companies, like any regulation, right, or any requirement, pretty much, which are kind of, from a substance perspective, they are pretty similar in thought process. But again, I think in kind of implementation, there could be minor changes here and there. So now when it comes to global organizations, these organizations basically, because they operate in all markets, they need to be compliant with all the requirements. So generally speaking, they take a more stricter approach of what a law requires. And they look at all the markets and try to see how we can comply with regulations in each of those markets. Now, each market might not have similar set of requirements, but then moving down to the lowest in terms of the most strictest and most compliant approach is how kind of they play out. But then also I see that there might be some challenges in implementing this from a local perspective. And that's where I think guys like me in this region and Matt and probably Ahmed and Karthik as well are kind of experts in understanding what are the requirements of ESG in UAE, in GCC, I think more than the region as well outside of Middle East. And then we try to see, are we missing something? Is there something more that we can do to improve the program, to see how we can kind of convince and try to influence the management in making those investments decision depending on what the requirements are as well. So I would say in summary, like any probably regulation, global ones, we need to assess what are the requirements, and I think we need to comply with those.
Yeah, if I could just jump in with one thought. My background is actually, I'm not a lawyer. My background is finance and audit and controllership. We have IFRS. It's the global standard for accounting. In the same way, I believe there's going to be a global standard, I hope, around ESG reporting. I mentioned in the opening comments ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board. This is the organization which should set the standards for us globally, across the world. And so then, every country will have to evaluate if that applies to their country and then sign up to that as a signatory to those standards, the same as IFRS. I really hope that simplifies and it makes it easier for corporates to report. We're comparing apples to apples. We know exactly which metrics to report, which KPIs, how to calculate them, and how to audit them. So then again, the investment banks and the whole investing community can have assurance that things are being reported correctly, even from country to country, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I hope we have consolidation in that space. I think it's important.
Thank you so much. Well, as time's up, we need to close this this panel discussion. And then I really appreciate your valuable insight and thoughtful questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day. Thank you.